Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. This season, we're talking about businesses who decide to double down. They're going to scale their business. Our theme this season is growing a business.
Right, Michael. And for those who don't know, growing a business is just one of the several seasons of business. What are the other seasons?
Great question, Brad. We have the building season, so starting a business. We have the operating season, so this is that phase where you're running a business. Mm-hmm. We're in the growing season right now, and then we'll finish the year off with the buying and selling season.
Awesome. Well, Michael, I think we need to go deep into our cortex to really form a connection with our audience. So get ready.
Okay.
What is your go-to fast food place between Chick-fil-A or Raising Cane's?
Well, I think the lead story here is you just tried to squeeze the word cortex in to your vocabulary, Mr. Fancy. Okay.
I did.
Okay.
It's a good,
all right.
good $1.50 word.
All right. Well, that gave me a few seconds to think about this answer because this is tricky because by far Chick-fil-A is the answer. But I feel like I know personally I prefer Raising Cane's.
Okay.
But Raising Cane's always feels more like a treat. Chick-fil-A is the default, and don't get me wrong, Chick-fil-A is awesome.
Yeah.
But it's the default. We can't arrive at anything as a consensus on our family. So we just kind of settle on Chick-fil-A. And it's just the one thing that everyone likes and everyone can do, even if they're not in the mood, especially when other things are on the table. Raising Cane's feels like it's more of a, let's get a treat. My kids love the French toast and the sauce, and it's a bigger to-do.
Absolutely.
What about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty indifferent. I actually like them both. I know that in my family, very similar to your story, it appears that Raising Cane has the edge when it comes to requesting that kind of fast food, especially if we have a bunch of people coming over. They're like, oh, just go get a big pan of Raising Cane. So that seems to be the easy out.
Well, interestingly, I have a very vivid memory of Raising Cane's because the day that we're recording this is the anniversary of us moving into our house many, many years ago, and it was a long journey. We were supposed to move in a month prior to when we did, and one of the things we didn't plan for was food. And someone I know who I usually make fun of, but today I won't, you and your family brought Raising Cane's and a huge thing of lemonade over, and it was perfect for where we were, and we wolfed it down.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I went to the wrong house. It was really awkward.
Yeah. So I answered, and you're like, oh, wait, here.
Oh, here.
Okay, well, what's up with all this fast food talk?
Yeah, so I read an article on the founder of Raising Cane's, a guy named Todd Graves. His story is pretty amazing. So he was attending LSU in the 1990s, and Todd had this great idea about starting a fast food restaurant that only served fried chicken fingers. His professor gave him a low grade and said, I don't think this is going to work. But, Todd believed in it. He disagreed. So he actually started working these odd jobs. He was a boilermaker in a Louisiana refinery. He went all the way up to Alaska and started doing commercial fishing for salmon just to save up enough money so that he could open his first Raising Cane's in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in 1996.
I hate to say it, I probably would have given him a bad grade as well. But shows you what I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah. And so for those who don't know, as of May of 2024, there are nearly 700 Raising Cane restaurants in the United States. These restaurants are located in 38 states, 512 cities. The state with the most Raising Cane's, Michael, is located in Texas with 177 restaurants. And Todd, with his quote-unquote bad business plan and no money to start it, is now worth over $8 billion.
Wow, you made me feel really stupid for agreeing with the professor. That's pretty impressive. Okay, well, I assume that since you mentioned this story, you're trying to build us up because we're in the scaling season and you've got a great story.
Yeah, correct. And imagine all the issues Todd faced while growing an idea from one store to this brand that is now known worldwide.
So are we going to talk a story of a singular product like chicken fingers or fried chicken, or do you have another Todd Graves story for today?
No, but this is a story about scaling quickly.
Okay, well, let's jump in.
All right, Michael. Today's story starts in Thibodaux, Louisiana, famously known for being the birthplace of one ByrdAdatto.
Well, as many stories start in Thibodaux, I guess. And no offense to your mom, but I don't think many people know where Thibodaux is located or have even heard that term before.
Yeah.
From what you told me, I recall it's, hour or so outside of New Orleans. Do they speak English or Cajun in Thibodaux?
Yeah, my cousins from Thibodaux, they don't have no Cajun accent. That's more from like the Bayou area.
Oh, Cynthia, I apologize for bringing that out of Brad. Can we just reset and scratch that part and go back to the story?
All right. Today's story, we start with Dr. Tiger, who actually is from Thibodaux.
Oh.
And Dr. Tiger went to LSU undergrad, where he met Mr. Mike while taking some business school classes.
Okay, well, can I just ask one question, Brad? Is all this Louisiana stuff going to be helpful to the rest of the country?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay, all right, good. Well, they have their own laws there, so I just want to make sure. Okay, well, audience, we'll just bear that in mind, and if we need to point anything out, we will. But I bet Brad's smart enough to bring something. So for those that are not following where Brad's got his names today, I'm assuming it has to do with LSU's mascot as a tiger, and they call him Mike. Is that right, Brad?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm guessing you're going there because the founder at Canes went there?
Yeah, that's correct. Multiple gold stars for you, Michael.
Okay.
Now, so after graduating from LSU, Mr. Mike started a medical business in Louisiana and was growing very rapidly. His business initially started out as managing medical offices, but he quickly switched to actually owning them too. Mm-hmm. And as such, Mr. Mike brought so he ended up buying several of these medical practices he was managing. But he kept the initial physicians there on as the supervising physicians.
Okay, Brad, I'm assuming that this story does not have a CPOM component, or corporate practice of medicine, as it's more formally known, since we're in Louisiana, and I believe Louisiana is a non-CPOM state.
That's correct. So we're not going to focus on CPOM.
Okay.
Originally, when Mr. Mike bought these clinics, they were mostly family and internal medicine practices. Now, Mr. Mike started seeing several elective aesthetic practices start opening up, and he decided that was where the growth area could be. So he started opening up new locations, which only focused on cash-based services. And he called this new practice the Purple and Gold Med Spa.
Okay, audience, when you hear the term elective services or aesthetic cosmetic treatments, these are generally non-surgical services. Mm-hmm. So just some sampling of these services might be laser tightening of the skin, laser hair removal, Botox injections, dermal fillers, and then you have IV infusions and, as we've spoke last week, I believe, weight loss treatments. So, purple and gold, Brad, LSU colors, am I on the right track? And then, are these some of the treatments that they were dealing with?
Yes, that's correct on the purple and gold. But the purple, yes, and treatment. So, the purple and gold med spa initially only had IV infusions.
Okay.
And then they set up near local colleges in Louisiana and quickly started adding other treatments. They had an idea that if they could set these purple and gold med spas up in college towns and in neighboring states too, they could start opening up like in Mississippi and Alabama. And Mr. Mike was aggressively opening up these new locations as he really didn't want anyone else to steal his idea.
Okay. did I miss something? What happened to Dr. Tiger? We've been talking about Mr. Mike this whole time.
Well, pretty good time in the question. As Mr. Mike expanded the Purple and Gold Med Spa into other service lines and states, these initial physicians that were running the original family and internal medicine practices, they really didn't have the skill set to understand all these different treatments being offered, much less oversee all these new locations.
So is this where Dr. Tiger rejoins the story?
Correct.
All right.
Dr. Tiger had an ENT practice in Thibodeau and was an entrepreneur really trapped in a doctor's body.
Well, we've said that about ourselves, although we say lawyer's body, but maybe sometimes we say we're trapped in a doctor's body as well.
We could be.
Yeah, okay.
Well, as an entrepreneur, Dr. Tiger had devoted time to several other businesses, including a medical scheduling software company, which is how Mr. Mike and Dr. Tiger rekindled their relationship from their old LSU days. Mr. Mike was looking for a better way to schedule patients and found out that Dr. Tiger, again, his old classmate, had one. As they discussed this opportunity to work with Dr. Tiger's software, Mr. Mike pitched to Dr. Tiger, hey, Dr. Tiger, you should be our chief medical officer for the Purple and Gold Med Spa.
Okay. Is this where we were brought in, Brad?
Actually, no.
Oh.
Dr. Tiger actually had an excellent corporate attorney named Mrs. Golden, and she was working with him in all these other investments, including the software company. Mrs. Golden helped negotiate the chief medical officer agreement, which what was important to Dr. Tiger was it gave him control over all medical decision-making and allowing him to review and implement medical processes.
I want to pause for a minute and talk. You use the term chief medical director agreement, and this can be a little misleading because, as we've talked about in prior episodes, medical director agreements is a generic term. It can have a ton of meanings, and so it really becomes important to understand what the role is. A lot of times, these chief medical director agreements, in context to a med spa, is almost just like a brand awareness, almost like a doctor influencer person that is the name behind the brand. But sometimes they're actually involved in setting, clinical policies in place, and then sometimes they're even actually involved in the chain of care. Mm-hmm. So I have some follow-up questions for you, Brad.
Okay, I'm ready.
Why Mrs. Golden as a name, and was Dr. Tiger licensed in Mississippi and Alabama as well?
To answer your first question, the character name Mrs. Golden comes from the dance team at LSU. They used to be called the Golden Girls of LSU. Mm. And as it relates to the second, Dr. Tiger was already licensed in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and he was actually in the process of obtaining license in states in which the Purple and Gold Med Spa was expanding.
Yeah, and that's pretty normal when you have a friendly doc to fill that role of getting licenses. Because generally speaking, you're going to have a licensed physician in each state that you do business. And if you have someone that's going back to that chief role, a lot of times that doctor will, as part of whatever else they're doing, get licenses in each of the states where the business is open.
Yeah, that friendly physician is a good point. Good points. The more locations and states that Dr. Tiger started overseeing, the more nervous Dr. Tiger started feeling. As the Purple and Gold Med Spa was aggressively pushing for more locations, Dr. Tiger was still trying to understand their current model, and Mr. Mike just kept pushing, saying we need to move rapid. We need rapid expansion. Mm-hmm. Dr. Tiger really started thinking that that Mr. Mike was really just laser focused on the business side, but not so much on the medical side. And Mrs. Golden, she recognized that her focus on working with Dr. Tiger kind of shifted, and she started getting uncomfortable with the compliance concerns that she had and Dr. Tiger had with the way the model was set up with the Purple and Gold Med Spa and expansion.
I see the opening, Brad.
Uh-oh.
You're teeing it up.
Yeah.
This is where we were brought in.
Yes.
Okay.
And believe it or not, Mrs. Golden and our team had worked together years ago, and she reached out to see if we could assist her and Dr. Tiger just with some of their compliance concerns.
Okay, give us some examples. What were some of the compliance concerns? What
is considered a medical service? Who can perform initial consult for a medical service? What are collaborative practice requirements between a physician and an NP or a PA? What is appropriate delegation and supervision for an RN and LPNs?
So all extremely normal questions that, especially for a non-healthcare attorney, they're pretty standard, basic for us, right? Like the core things. And I'm guessing that they wanted these answers for each state?
Yeah, actually, no. Originally, they just wanted us to assist with developing an overall best practice guide, which Dr. Tiger was going to go further develop as the chief medical officer into actually the policies and procedures for all the purple and gold med spas.
So you said the word originally.
Oh.
Okay. Is that important? Did we actually end up doing something different?
Well, actually, like with a lot of our new clients, we like the system by first understanding their current model. And so we started off with a practice assessment whiteboard, really outlining the current model as they understood it and we understood it.
Okay. Well, how did that go?
Hey, it went great, actually. We outlined the model, detailed some compliance aspects of the model, and for Dr. Tiger and Mrs. Golden, they loved it. And they said they want to get back to Mr. Mike and discuss next steps.
Okay, well, let's go. What were they?
So,
what were the next steps?
Yeah, so Dr. Tiger and Mrs. Golden were going through the notes of the compliance concerns raised during that whiteboard. And with Dr. Tiger, it was just really trying to help focus Mr. Mike on the medical side. And in doing so, he felt like they needed to slow down the expansion and really retool some of these compliance concerns that was raised in that whiteboard.
So what happened?
Nothing.
Oh.
Mr. Mike and his team rejected every compliance concern that Dr. Tiger raised and said that no one was doing it that way that we were recommending. That Mr. Mike had spoken to, quote, a bunch of attorneys, and what we recommended was not needed.
The bunch of attorneys' defense. The nameless, faceless many that say the opposite. Okay, well, I'm assuming it's your fault, Brad. I mean, what did you recommend that was so edgy that this nameless crew of a bunch of attorneys had not?
That they would need to hire more physicians to supervise the number of NPs and PAs that they were dealing with. They needed actually some local physicians to help with a couple different procedures they were trying to implement. They needed proper medical personnel to actually clear the patients before they started providing medical procedures, and that they couldn't just use a standing order to skip several key steps.
Well, I really want to make fun of you, but I can't because that seems pretty in line. So I'm just going to say let's go to commercial rather than hone in on you having some good points. Let's take a break, and then on the other side, we'll come back and let's get into it.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Now, Michael, this season, our theme is growing a business. And we're, talking about business that want to scale. And today, we had a story that a lot was happening.
Yeah, and it's going to be challenging. I've got the setting is in Louisiana, and so it's not my comfort zone.
Because of the Cajun accent?
Yes. Okay. Yes, exactly, Brad. So I hope I don't get a Cajun accent trying to reframe this. Okay, so let's go back. It all started at LSU, right?
Yeah.
Kind of the same place as Mr. Chicken that we started,
Yes,
Todd Graves.
Todd.
Yes. So we have some college buddies. We have Dr. Tiger, who becomes relevant a little later in the story, but they're buddies. He's buddies with Mr. Mike.
Yeah.
Mr. Mike decides to own some medical practices and evolves and then expands into other areas and opens up a medical spa, purple and gold med spa. Okay.
The purple and gold.
The purple and gold med spa. And reconnects with Mr. Mike along the way. Dr. Tiger. Dr. Tiger had his own business. They get reconnected, decides he needs a chief medical officer. They get going. Dr. Tiger starts getting a little nervous because Mr. Mike is very focused on the business side, it seems, and growing really fast and not so worried about the medical side. Now, the medical was all just IV hydration. Am I right?
It was.
Okay. And then there's a bunch of attorneys who were telling Mr. Mike that, it was all good and didn't agree with your advice that there were some compliance concerns.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, which if I didn't do a good job of, it started off with IV, but then they quickly started doing all the other treatments that you typically see at a med spa.
Gotcha.
Including Botox and fillers and lasers.
And they were expanding into multiple states?
Yeah.
Okay. And so did I catch the story right, Brad?
Good job, Michael.
Okay.
And, and as you were summarizing, this is, there's this large multiple state business that they're scaling, but they weren't really focused on the compliance, which is why they brought in a CMO. How do you respond when someone notes that, well, everyone else is doing it that way, and they're super big, because they were, so it must be okay?
It's so tricky because, number one, in some cases, that's just people's defensiveness, right? Like, this guy seemed clearly not to care about it, and so he just, hid behind the nameless, faceless many. But there's also another side to the coin, which is, this is a really non-compliant industry, and there actually are a lot of other people that are doing it this way. And so you have kind of a place you can go hide. We've talked about this in other episodes, and you objectively, your risk is probably lower if everyone else is doing it. I use the whole, highway analogy. You're driving a car. If you're going 80 in a school zone, you're going to get caught. If you're driving 80 in the flow of traffic on a highway and the speed limit is 55, odds are much lower. The problem is that, well, in this story, your client, ByrdAdatto's client, was a doctor. His license was on the line, so he was taking the heaviest risk. And there's not like the random radar gun that's going to get you pulled over. It's going to come from something that goes wrong, right? Yeah. It's going to be a patient or an employee that turns you in, or a competitor. So, Brad, maybe you can address one of the issues raised.
Okay.
What are the collaborative practice requirements between a physician and a PA and nurse practitioner?
Yeah, and taking out the rule of thumb that if some nurse practitioner or PA is independent or autonomous, this doesn't really apply. But generally, a physician may delegate certain medical procedures, such as like initial medical consultation, to a PA or nurse practitioner, so long as there's some type of written supervisory agreement between the PA and NP and that same supervising physician. This written supervising agreement must include like certain elements about what they can and cannot do. So what procedures can they do? What drugs can they prescribe? And this is also based on understanding what is that PA nurse practitioner's background, from their education and clinic training and certifications that they have, and what other activities they train in before that. And that agreement may include, like I said, the ability, which is important with Botox and fillers, prescribing drugs.
So and let's kind of, in terms of the actual required level of supervision, generally speaking, the supervising physician for PAs and NPs is not required to be on site at all times, but that usually you hear this term like readily available by phone or some other form of communication. Yeah. And again, this is for states where the PA and NP don't have independence or even a higher degree of autonomy.
Right. Good point again. In addition, the supervising physician will have a limit to the number of PAs and NPs they can actually supervise. So I'll give an example. Like in Alabama, which they were, the supervising physician may not collaborate with or supervise more than 9 full-time equivalent PAs and NPs. While we jump over to Florida, a supervising physician may not supervise more than 10 PAs at one time. Now, Michael, follow-up question that we often receive is, well, does this mean that the supervising physician can oversee 9 PAs in Alabama and then 10 PAs in Florida?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because you think, well, I'm compliant in this state and then I'm compliant in this state. The problem is it goes back to that whole absentee physician element, which is a medical board's number one focus is going to be on patient safety. And the purpose of limiting it is so that the doctor can be engaged and not absentee. Oh. Yeah. And so they're not stretched too thin. Well, if you have 19 instead of 9, that when you come under investigation, that's going to be a problem. And so that's certainly, if you're under investigation in a state and those facts come into the equation, it's going to be problematic. And so, yeah, I mean, that's your answer.
Yeah, another good point. Wait. Cynthia, strike all that. Michael, he's getting way too many compliments about this one. But your point, I don't know if it's good or not, is if a medical board finds out that you're non-compliant in one state, it's going to lead to investigations in another state.
Absolutely.
Which is really going to open up that whole Pandora's box of issues as the supervising physician. All right, now, Michael, I know that we have talked about this in other shows, but for some reason, I can't figure it out. There are a lot of people keep pushing back on us and saying, really, look, if someone's a cash-paying patient and it's elective, do we really have to go through the whole medical clearance of a patient, sometimes called the initial medical consultation or the initial, good faith exam? I mean, do we really have to do that?
Yes.
Oh.
If it's the practice of medicine, Brad. So, and here's the trick. So, you hear the cash base. So this is just retail. So you don't need to do it. And you mentioned that. The other is just the perception that it's not medical. So classic thing that we hear about all the time is IV hydration. And they think, well, it's just an IV. Nurses can do it. It happens all the time. This is, crazy. I bet there is a bunch of attorneys out there that are not healthcare attorneys that would echo that sentiment. But the key comes down to this. It's a core function, core principle of compliance. If the treatment is the practice of medicine, then that practice of medicine, you have to be cleared. The doctor or someone with the scope of practice has to evaluate the patient, look at their history, examine the patient, and determine that the treatment's appropriate. We use the term good faith exam. That's actually the term in California, and it's just kind of a term of art in most other states. But the principle is the same, which is you have to have a treatment plan that's issued by someone that has the ability to exercise independent judgment. Now, kind of a sister concept that you hear about is standing orders, and that's tricky because you'll see that in the hospital system all the time. The idea with standing orders is, well, here, I'm the doctor. I'm going to sign off just this blanket statement that or order that you can go and issue IVs to whoever as needed, and that somehow satisfies. And in the context of what we're talking about, which is a private practice scenario, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
There are some benefits if used correctly to written protocols or SOPs or even standing orders that serve that function. But if you're trying to get around the need for a good faith exam, it doesn't work.
Yeah. And audience members, I think where Michael said this, I want to make sure you're catching on this. The term good faith exam really is coming from the state of California, but it's other states kind of talk about it. So someone might say, well, in my state, we don't have anything called the good faith exam. It's not. I mean, that's just a term of art we're using. It's really making sure that that person is a good candidate for those particular services.
Well, let's jump back in. Tell me what happened next in the story.
Sure. So we had several calls with Mr. Mike, Dr. Tiger, and Mrs. Golden trying to work through these compliance issues. Each time we thought we made some progress, where Mr. Mike agreed to make certain changes to the process. We later learned that nothing was happening, and basically it was a lot of empty promises.
Okay. Well, so what did Dr. Tiger do, Brad?
Dr. Tiger had a successful ENT practices. He had other medical and non-medical businesses that he had ownership in, besides the Purple and Gold Med Spa. As such, he really just said, I'm going to terminate this agreement with you guys because you're not concerned about the medical piece. You're moving way too fast and way too loose, the way Mr. Mike really had this vision for the Purple and Gold Med Spa.
Well, do you know what ended up happening to the Purple and Gold Med Spa?
I did later learn that after Dr. Tiger had left, the Purple and Gold Med Spa had several locations where they started receiving notices, one from the state of Alabama for the improper supervision and the lack of that medical consultation or good faith exam. The good news was that these patients were not treated while Dr. Tiger was the chief medical officer. The bad news for Mr. Mike was a lot of these local supervising physicians who either were not part of that roll-up or just had heard about it. They started obviously getting very nervous, and they said, "I'm out," and they all started, terminating their relationship. And I did hear through Dr. Tiger that Mr. Mike had to close a lot of those stores because they weren't doing things properly. Michael, final thoughts.
Well, scaling is hard, and I can have a little bit of empathy for Mr. Mike. If you think about, even Chick-fil-A or Raising Cane's, I'm sure they had growing pains at some point, and we all think of them as iconic, successful, scaled businesses. And the problem is that in healthcare there's compliance, and so for a non-doctor like Mr. Mike, I can understand he probably had a million headaches he was trying to solve and trying to grow his business, and just couldn't wrap his brain around adding compliance as an element. And we saw how that turned out. It's just so important to understand when you are in a business that's practicing medicine, compliance is, you can't lose sight of that foundational concern, or it'll cost your business.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Michael, next Wednesday we have a real treat for our audience. We're going to have a live podcast with a former CIA analyst, David McCloskey, and we're going to discuss improving ways of how to communicate and give you some skills, how to to make decisions, both either in the work or in the home life. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe, make sure to give us a 5-star rating, and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.